Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to day two of our coverage of COP28 in Dubai. Really glad to have each and every one of you here today. As always, a few ground rules. If you're joining via Zoom, we do have a dedicated section where you are able to ask questions towards the end of our segment. If you are attending via Facebook, we do have someone monitoring the chat, so please feel free to ask any questions in the Facebook chat. We're happy to respond, happy to take those questions and engage with that discussion live on Zoom. Today, there's a whole host of interesting news and tidbits that are going on. However, today we're going to get started with our very own Michael Fidler, who has on-the-ground coverage, photos, and video content, and also some wonderful commentary. So, Michael, welcome so much to the program. The show is all yours.
Thank you, Rock, for the welcome. And let me just share my screen with all the images from the first day. This would be the very first image I have taken when I arrived to COP, because COP28 takes place in Dubai Exhibition Center. Looks quite impressive. Once you enter, it's even more impressive. I took these images, some of them today, some of them yesterday, and even day before yesterday when things were still getting ready. So last minute touch-ups here in Dubai. And once I entered, I saw a map like this with all kind of pavilions. There are probably around 100 of pavilions, various pavilions around COP in the exhibition center. So plenty to see. I'll need to get oriented. I've been walking around for a while and still get lost here. Now, this is how the area between the pavilions look like, and often you meet gentlemen and ladies in the traditional clothes. I read somewhere that there should be around 70,000 people coming to this COP. I said somewhere else it would be 30,000 people, but I read somewhere else that there was a Swiss watch convention 2 weeks ago or a week ago in Dubai, and there was 1,100 people here. Either way, there is plenty of people at COP. These images were taken yesterday when COP was officially opened, and it seemed like a good photo opportunity for many people because I was just taking images of people taking selfies and images of themselves all the time. Sometimes they just stop me and ask me to take more photos. I chatted with these Dominican Republic representatives for a while and had to take maybe 30 photos of them. Then we went to the main stage, to the plenary, and they wanted photos there as well. So it was just an ongoing show of taking more images. So selfies, and hey, here I am, take an image of me. This would be again in the plenary where the main where some of the most important talks happen, and many people were just waiting in a queue to get on the stage and have their image taken, just like this lady, I believe, from Fiji. I took probably 200 or 300 images like that. I was just tired. And as soon as you have the image in your phone, of course, it has to go to the world on Instagram and Facebook. And no matter where you come from, these images have to go live right away, so people can check it on their mobile phones. Now, this would be for the photo opportunities part of this presentation. And I went to check on some of the pavilions yesterday and today as well. Now, this is an image from the US pavilion. And if you see the message, it says, we are just getting ready. Scan the code, come back tomorrow. I did come back tomorrow, meaning I came there today. It was still the same. They weren't ready. Hopefully tomorrow they will officially start. Now, if you compare this US pavilion to the Japanese pavilion, that's a different story. They were already all set. There were the Japanese people getting ready and in a line and waiting to be to entertain us and explain us what they are doing there, what equipment they brought. Completely different story to some of the pavilions which are still getting ready. I walked to the Chinese pavilion as well. They had already some presentations there. It was all in Chinese, so hard to tell what they were talking about. I look at to the on the presentations, probably like the lady on the left, I had the same expression because I did not understand a single word. Now, this would be some other images from, this is again from Chinese pavilion, and I believe this is from the Indonesian pavilions. I will report more on the setup of the pavilions later on, because the pavilions are very different comparing to what we experienced during the previous years. So I'll get back to you in the coming days. This is just an image from the technical room when these technicians they are supposed to sit here for the next 2 weeks and just watch the presentation one after another. So on the first day they were already pretty bored. Then I went to the press conference room. I think this press conference room 2, where Yango was delivering their initial statement or initial press. They were organizing their initial press conference. Yango, one of the UN institutions for young people. There was a crowd. I was surprised how many young people were there. It was pretty full, but the talk was not really that entertaining. I was also hoping that maybe Greta would show up, but she wasn't there. I guess she's just busy with the Palestinian issue right now. That seems to be what she's orienting on right now. So Yanko is here delivering their presentation, or here the press conference. And then there was the time for the opening ceremony. So I went to the first plenary, and I was surprised by how easily I was able to get in. I found a place to sit, and I sat in Iran. And at this point, I realized I'm in the wrong plenary. There are 2 main big plenaries here. I can't pronounce the name. They are both Arabic. And at this point, I knew that I am in the wrong room. But the lights dimmed out. I waited what was going to happen. And then the official ceremony started, but it was transmitted from the second plenary, from the plenary across the street. So we were just watching the big screens there, and there was nobody on the stage. I could have just watched it on YouTube as well and would have the same experience, but at least it gave me a feeling that this is how it will look like. Now, few more images from the, wrong plenary, and then I decided it's time to go to the correct plenary and see if I can get in there. And it was not really that easy. Well, actually, in the old plenary, I was still waiting for this gentleman. This is the president of COP28. His name is Sultan Al-Jaber. I'm sure we will hear about him in the coming days as well. So I just waited for him to show up and took image like that from the main screen, and then I moved to the other plenary. Now, when I was leaving the wrong plenary, it was easy to get out, but then when I got to the correct plenary, or the area where it was really supposed to take place, that was a problem, because there was a huge crowd of people trying to get in. And I was really sorry for this security gentleman who was just managing the crowd, because everybody was trying to get in. And there was a lot of shouting, and there was a lot of pressure. I felt seriously sorry for this gentleman who had to manage it. For some reason, he was the one who managed the main crowd, and then there was plenty of security guys behind him, and there was also the UN security guys behind him, and nobody helped him. This gentleman had a really rough time, I would say. Now, I was not able to get in during the official opening ceremonies. That was really just for the heads of the parties. But eventually I got there later on, maybe an hour later on. And this is how the main plenary looked like. And when I stepped in, there was a lot of clapping, plenty of clapping. I did not really understand what was happening. I guessed it was not because of me being able to enter the room, but there was just plenty of clapping. So I sat down and went on the internet to see what was happening. Then I found out on the internet that they actually just approved some mechanism for the loss and damage fund that was expected for a long time. Then I got a chance to take few images of the main stage, and the guy on the right, or in the middle, in the white clothes, that's Sultan Al-Jaber, the president of COP28, and he just told the audience, you know what, wait, I have an important phone call, I need to take it, please wait. he stopped the meeting for a minute or two and then turned back and says, you know what, I just got a phone call. I got $100 million approved for the loss and damage and fund for this fund. Good news. There was a lot of clapping, and everybody seemed to be pretty happy about the first $100 million approved for this fund. Then he gave the floor to whoever was interested to get the floor. Germany was the first one. There was the Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development from Germany, and she said basically the same thing. We are donating $100 million to this fund as well. Somebody else wanted the floor. There was the UK and there was EU and so on. It went on for a while, and I think they've donated about $400 or $500 million during the first 10 minutes after this was announced. Now that's a good news, but then there was some other states took the floor, and the US was not really that eager to make a donation to this fund, and it went on and on. For example, when Iran showed up and had the floor, they basically said that they are happy that there is some money in the fund right now, but it's managed through a World Bank, so they will not have access to it. So it's not as simple as it looks like. And the main point is some of the agencies said that there is needed $500 billion for this fund, not $500 million. So there is an order of magnitude difference. So this image should show once again the Sultan Al-Jaber, who went from the very smiley face to a little bit of disappointed face, as it turns out that it's not going to be as easy as he probably hoped. And with this would be the last image of the day, just showing the surprise in the face of the COP president that there will be plenty of difficulties during this COP. And with this being said, I'm turning it back to you, Rock.
Sounds good, Michael. Thank you. As always, from last year to this year, always wonderful coverage, wonderful photos. And I think it gives some of our audience a more in-depth perspective about what's going on the ground. So thank you once again for that demonstration and for those photos as well. Well, one thing that was discussed yesterday that I think that we'll continue with the dialogue on today is simply the train wreck of the political angles that are taking place at this event. At the heart of COP28, some of the deliberations of COP28 yesterday and today is an unfolding scene, and basically is there's a massive bit of tension between Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who's been calling for radical transformations of our energy systems for years since he was announced as Secretary General, and also the COP28 President Sultan Ahmed Al-Jaber, who continues to propose reliance on fossil fuels. Directly after a speech that Antonio Guterres made, essentially calling for the reduction of fossil fuels and how we cannot save a burning planet with a fire hose of fossil fuels, COP28 President Sultan Ahmed Al-Jaber came on stage and said, yes, we can save a planet with a fire hose of fossil fuels. And this tension taking place between the delegation of Antonio Guterres and the delegation of the COP28 President Sultan Ahmed Al-Jaber continues to unfold day by day, with other leaders such as King Charles III, Rishi Sunak from the United Kingdom, and Indian Prime Minister Modi, who all have weighed in on this narrative, admonishing wealthy countries for their historical roles in emitting the most climate warming gases, but also, as well as some of these Western nations also saying that, yes, we should decrease our use of fossil fuels over time. In a broader context, I think this story encapsulates the challenges of COP28 in the nutshell, where Dubai is essentially the nation. Dubai is located within the UAE, which is a nation which is the literal oil capital of the world, and you can kind of see those dialogues unfolding from Al-Jaber, who continuously makes the approach that we should decrease our use of fossil fuels over a very long period of time, and then continue to use them throughout the next few years. Whereas Secretary General Antonio Guterres says, as soon as we possibly can, we need to end our use of fossil fuels. I'm really glad to see that our director, Dr. John Capece, is also here. John, how is it on the ground at COP28? How are you seeing these tensions unfolding in a new sense, different from yesterday? What is your sense?
Well, we today was another partial day here at COP28, admittedly. Michael and I spent the afternoon, interestingly, with an old friend from the oil and gas industry. Back in the early 2000s, Michael was an intern in my office, and there was another young man from Tajikistan, and he had been going to school for oil and gas industry degree in Turkey and came to our program to help us with water quality projects. And he did an excellent job, just an absolutely terrific young engineer. And then he went off and got employment in his industry. So it's been 20 years since we've seen each other in person. And he was traveling, he works in Qatar now, and was traveling from one place to another and had a stopover in Dubai. So he took a few hours and came over and visited with Michael and myself. And you know, it's a terrific reunion. The two of them, Michael and this other fellow, had opened an office for us after their internships in Tajikistan, where we were doing rotary water projects, clean water for small rural villages in Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. We even did some projects in Afghanistan. So they ran that office for a number of years together. But he went on to his profession. And, you know, in the course of our conversation, we started talking about climate change and the oil and gas industry. And I explained how the advancement of civilization has basically been on the backs of a combination of energy and technology. Technology, learning how to practice agriculture, learning about medical issues and human health. And this really allowed the flourishment of our population and our industry and our civilization. And energy is directly tied to that. You can basically determine a society's standard of living by looking at its energy use, energy consumption. Now, we would all hope that as technology increases even further, we learn how to deliver that standard of living with more efficient use of energy, lower energy. But Jevons paradox says that regardless of how much efficiency improvement you achieve, you're always going to consume more of that product that you're attempting to optimize through efficiency, in this case, energy. So we were discussing the role of the oil and gas industry in this COP and in society in general. And I explained to him, as I mentioned yesterday in our discussion, that from my perspective, the problem isn't necessarily that we developed our civilization based upon fossil fuels, but rather we never use the benefits of those fossil fuels to move to the next level sufficiently and in time. We haven't evolved our energy use from, say, wood to coal to oil. We have not made that leap to higher level, cleaner energy technologies. So instead, we've sort of squandered the benefits of fossil fuels and its delivery of capacity, ability of the human race to move forward. We've really squandered the use of that energy in sort of idle amusement and leisure to a large extent. So I don't really see the issue being the oil and gas producers. It's more the consumers and the nature of the consumption. If we were not demanding this material, the fossil fuels, they would not produce the fossil fuels. And I asked him, how do people in the industry itself, he has children, so he's concerned as much as anyone. When he was in my office, he worked very hard on our water quality projects and in our village water projects. So he cares about people, he cares about the future, he cares about the environment. But when it comes to fossil fuels, people who are in the industry, I asked them, what do what do you say? Are the people climate deniers in the oil and gas industry, or do they take some other dismissive attitude? And he said that basically they do not talk about it. It's just not brought up in their circles. And I suppose that's simply perhaps trying to avoid the issue, or they haven't reconciled in their mind how they can talk about the issue and evaluate their own profession and their own lifestyle in the context of the climate crisis. So I found that to be quite interesting. Is Michael still with us?
I believe Michael is still here. Yes.
Yes, I'm still here. Yeah.
What was your take on our conversations today, and how you think our friend in the oil and gas industry, deals with it, and his perspectives on it, and those of his colleagues?
It seemed to me that at first he was not really sure what to say. He had to give it some thinking. I think he did not want to really talk about it that much. I could not really tell why. But my feeling was that he was not ready to discuss it. I could not tell why. I met with him actually maybe 5 or 6 days ago when I was in Qatar for a few days. We met in Doha. We went for a dinner, and he was very talkative, and we talked about the old times and his current projects, and the easy topics. And he was very talkative, and we talked for 3 hours. I could not stop. But today we opened some of the more difficult topics, and I'm not sure whether he was ready to talk about it or he didn't want to talk about it. I could not really tell. But I was a little surprised, because comparing to what we had just few days ago in Doha, we had a very lively conversation non-stop. We could hardly just leave each other. And today, but maybe it was also because he was in a rush for his.
Yeah, well, that's entirely possible.
It was just a few days ago.
Right. Well, I just found that interesting, the conversation to be interesting, and I'm actually looking forward to talking with him more about this. And maybe now that we've had this initial conversation, maybe he'll begin to contemplate or try to formulate his thoughts on it, and maybe explore the conversation with some of his colleagues to see what they have to say. But as I mentioned, he has children. He's concerned about their future as well, as we all are, about the next generation. And he's he's very concerned also about the other environmental issues, water quality and habitat and so on. He's worked with us on those issues over the decades. So I found that to be somewhat enlightening, but I would like to explore it further. And I think we should try to take the opportunity of being here at this conference to maybe have that conversation with some of the delegates from the oil producing nations, perhaps interview some of them, given that they will have clearly formulated some thoughts on it. And I suppose that, I was listening to some news stories where can we deal with the climate crisis within the context of continued use of fossil fuels? As I mentioned yesterday, that's largely a determination of what technologies to take the carbon out of the atmosphere once it's been injected by the use of fossil fuels, and how much of the fossil fuels that will require. Can you capture the equivalent of, say, is it only 1-to-1? In other words, it takes 1 gallon of gasoline to use the energy to take out the carbon that's been emitted by 1 gallon of gasoline? Or will technology allows us to take out of the atmosphere the emissions of 1 gallon of gasoline using 1 cup of gasoline? So that ratio deals with the economics, and that will determine, I believe, whether or not we can continue with the extraction and use of fossil fuels into the future.
I think that discussion highlights an interesting segue into energy use, energy production, as well as what's larger nations who have the ability to transition more effectively, more quickly, but also to understand where that energy can be invested in at this point. I think the right terminology here is investment. Where do we invest our energy dollars over the longer period of time to wean ourselves off of fossil fuels at a more efficient rate, not less to spend ourselves perhaps on leisure and more on the energy and technological production that we need. And this interesting story came across my desk actually a few minutes ago, which was French President Emmanuel Macron's call for the G7 nations to put an end to coal by 2030. It's a really interesting thought and theory because, first of all, it's unlikely to happen. But secondly, it showcases a nation which has a large history of reliance on nuclear energy, who can perhaps afford to reach the end of coal by 2030, whereas the rest of the nations, especially Western nations such as the USA, are probably going to be much, much further along before they reach their logical end of coals. I think 2050 is even a stretch for nations like the USA, but I think it perhaps provides an interesting context of a nation like France, who has, for the longest period of time, perhaps correctly transitioned from fossil fuels to nuclear energy, or perhaps never had that reliance on fossil fuels to the degree that the rest of the world's nations, Western nations and G7 nations do. So that perhaps provides an interesting context for this discussion. France perhaps unknowingly plotted this course through nuclear to reach the end of fossil fuels at a very early rate. John, what are your thoughts on that discussion?
Well, I think that's another good opportunity here at COP to ask the question to the French delegates, the French pavilion staff. How do they explain the success of nuclear energy in France relative to the public's acceptance of it? What are the differences in the French culture, the French population, French government, the French politics relative to nuclear, as contrasted with their neighbor Germany, that just decommissioned their nuclear power infrastructure, and the United States, which is sort of stumbling along in the middle on this issue. So I think we should, perhaps explore that, particularly from the political perspective. Now, also on politics, Judy Freiberg, our Environmental Caucus Vice President, sent me an email because I'd asked her to see if she could track down who was going to be among the U.S. delegation at this COP28. And she forwarded to me a message, and it says that more than a dozen members of Congress, both from both chambers and both parties, and more than 24 staff are expected to attend COP28 next week. Headlining the delegations are House and Energy and Commerce Chair Kathy McMorris Rogers, Republican of Washington, and Ranking Member Frank Pallone, Democrat of New Jersey. Conservative Climate Caucus leaders, Representatives John Curtis, Republican of Utah, and Marionette Miller Meeks, Republican of Iowa, also plan to attend. House Climate Solutions Caucus co-chairs, Representatives Andrew Garbarino, Republican of New York, and Chrissy Houlanahan, Democrat of Pennsylvania, I'm sure I just butchered her name, will also lead bipartisan groups. Senators led by Foreign Relations Committee Chair Ben Cardin, Democrat of Maryland, will be accompanied by bipartisan delegation of congressional staff. Now, last year, I know we had at least 3 U.S. senators attend, and Cardin was one of them. And I think we had about 19 representatives. So if they're talking about just a handful of representatives and perhaps a dozen total, that would be a smaller delegation from Congress than the 20 that attended last year. But we have the Vice President attending, and as always, John Kerry. So we will be working on trying to arrange interviews with these various people. It will be difficult. We managed to interview Kathy Castor. Kathy Castor. I always get confused because her mother was a politician as well, Betty Castor, and my age shows when I attempt to refer to Kathy Castor as Betty Castor. So we were successful last year, and we hope to have similar success this year in conducting such interviews.
I'm really glad to see that there are a number of U.S. delegates attending this event, right and left. I think this provides some wonderful context as well, because there is a noticeable absence, I believe, of Joe Biden, our actual U.S. president, at this event. It was just announced that our Vice President, Kamala Harris, will be attending in lieu of Biden and will make the same remarks that President Biden would have made. So at least we will have some U.S. Delegations that are not the Secretary of State attending this event, creating and administering remarks, which is incredibly important because not only does it show that the U.S. is still invested in COP28, which many were claiming that the U.S. was not invested when Biden withdrew as a potential speaker at the event, but it also highlights the U.S.'s position when it comes to their quotas. As you may have remembered, in 2015 and thereafter, the U.S. has made numerous pledges, and the Biden administration has suggested that we could cut 50% of our emissions down to 2030 with a track or a goal on track to reach zero neutral by 2050. So it'll be nice to have Kamala Harris, Vice President Kamala Harris, here at the event to speak. Also, there is the U.S. Energy Information Administration delegates that are attending this event too, which it'll be nice if we could perhaps arrange for some discussions with them. But I am actually curious, John, about your thoughts about what you intend to ask the U.S. delegation when you finally sit down with a representative, with the representatives from the USA, such as Representative Castor or any of the other delegates at the event. Do you have a prepared set of questions that you think our audience of the Democratic Party might want to hear?
I have a sense of those questions in my head. I haven't put them to paper yet, but I will in the next day or so. My objective is to glean from them what they intend to do on the more significant aspects of addressing this climate challenge. We can begin investing in electric vehicles and more solar panels and so on and so forth, put a lot of dollars into that, which generates economic activity, jobs, which, is the objective of every politician. That's how they get rewarded. They deliver on economics and keep us out of a war. Well, sometimes they don't even have to keep us out of a war to get reelected, but they do have to deliver on economics to get reelected. So these current technologies that we have can be exploited politically to deliver those political outcomes, but those will not, save us in this climate crisis. What that will require is some dramatically new technologies, and that requires research on a totally different level, on a totally different scale than what we're currently pursuing. They're throwing $1 billion here, $1 billion there. It sounds like big money, but in the scheme of things, it is not, into research and development. But it's going to take a lot more, and it's going to take, as I've said before, a space race, an arms race sort of approach to this. And I want to see, given that it's not politically palatable, that's not something they can run on. That's not something that public will necessarily respond to, but it's something that a government must do. And I want to try to extract from them some sort of inkling that, yes, they may not talk about it much, but we are working on that, and we have some big plans to deliver in that direction. So that's what I want to get to. I want to know what they're going to do for research and development, what they're going to do for our university systems, and to help us, meet these challenges.
Yes, I think that the innovation and technological breakthroughs are not just a challenge, but maybe also how much do you actually believe that the delegates attending this event understand the nature of our technological challenges and the potential breakthroughs that we can possibly make? I mean, how much do you think these representatives actually might understand about the long-term benefits and use of the developing nuclear technology, about global collaboration, and perhaps even some more long-term visions beyond the scope of their own elections? I think that we in the Democratic Party have a unique perspective attending this event because we do and have relationships with our elected officials in such a way that we could interact with them in this context. And perhaps, we discuss very often resilience and adaptation technologies, the differences between the two of them, investments in one or both, and the degree to which we should be adapting more rather than relying on resilience technologies.
Well, when it comes to nuclear energy, the Republicans are taking a more overt active role in supporting nuclear power. Democrats sometimes do, but they're a little nervous given the attitudes of the public. So we'll have to see what the Democratic politicians are willing to say on that front. And that might be a very good question if we can get a hold of some of the Republican politicians as well that will be attending and asking them the very same questions.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I'm really glad that we already have a list of folks attending this event so that we can kind of prepare questions for each of them. I mean, questions that might be directed more towards Vice President Kamala Harris are definitely different than questions which you might direct towards Representative Kathy Castor. Delegations from Florida versus delegations from Wisconsin versus delegations from the national folks attending this event too.
When people attending ask questions, do you think you can simply connect them? Great.
I'm sorry, your connection is very spotty here. So I'm going to go ahead and read your question in the chat here, and then I'll direct it towards either myself, John, or Michael Fidler, depending on the nature of the question. So BB asks, could you ask about backup storage batteries to flatten the demand curve and provide more time for developing new technologies? I'm a proponent of gridstatus.io approach. They're probably familiar with the findings in Texas and Florida. John, what are your thoughts on backup storage batteries in relation to demand curve?
Well, that's really been the limiting factor in so many of the renewable energies is the ability to store the energy. And there's a number of ways that you can store energy. When you plants, in effect, store energy from the sun, and we use that later in the form of wood. Hydropower, you can pump water uphill, and that becomes an energy storage, and when it flows back downhill, you extract that electricity again through turbines. Or we can have our chemical batteries, our lead acid or our lithium batteries to have an electrical. There's also capacitance batteries. And I've heard about some very interesting research and some prototypes on using, in effect, the structure of a home, the concrete, the bricks, formulated in a certain manner where they become a low density but large volume, large mass storage of energy. So you store your electricity in the walls of your home. So there are a variety of technologies. But last year, and I'm looking forward to the U.S. Center if they're going to have a presentation on this again, because last year, or maybe it was 2 years ago, these COPs sort of run together in my mind. The U.S. Department of Energy announced that they had embarked upon a 10-year project with the objective of bringing down the cost of long-term storage. They didn't specifically say batteries. They said batteries were one form of that, and their primary focus batteries, to bring down the cost of long-term storage. And long-term, they say is 10 hours or longer. In other words, you collect the electricity, you store it for 10 hours, you deliver it back. So even as short as 10 hours, that's what they're looking for. And they said that their goal was to bring down the cost of that storage, of those batteries, by 90% in 10 years. 90% in 10 years. And that would be a game changer, particularly on home solar photovoltaics, because as you know, whenever you have, in Florida at least, when you have solar energy, you have to operate off a net metering button and connect it to the grid. And it used to be if you used 0 kilowatt hours in a month, you paid a 0 bill. But because of solar, because many homeowners have solar, as I do, when we deliver excess power back into the grid, in the course of a month, say in a month we use less energy than we deliver into the grid, we receive from the power company 4 cents a kilowatt hour. Now, when the energy company sells to us, when we're a net consumer from the energy company, we're paying 14 cents a kilowatt hour. So there's a little bit of a discrepancy there that they attribute to the infrastructure. However, in recent years, they've transformed their business model. They've gotten the public service commissions to approve base fees. So now the power company charges us approximately $25 a month, even if you use zero electricity. That may not sound like a lot, but if you're investing in a home solar system and they're extracting from you $25, $30 a month, $300 a year, that eats into the economics, the payback over 10, 20 years of your investment in home solar. So the power companies are playing games with this. However, if the battery technology comes down sufficiently, if you brought that battery technology down by 90%, even 50%, most homeowners would switch from net metering to a total standalone use of solar combined with storage batteries. Now, the question becomes, will the power companies still be able to charge a homeowner the base fee even if they fully disconnect from the power grid? Now, with water companies, a water utility has that right. In other words, if there's a water pipe, a utility water line going in front of your house, you cannot simply drop a well and treat your own water and consume it. You are required by law to pay that utility their base fee every month. So the power company could try to get similar regulatory relief in that not only if you disconnect from the power grid, you would still be liable for that base fee. So that would undermine the investments in batteries, even for a homeowner. Is there a follow-up question on that?
Maybe asks how Duke, FPL, and NextGen rate in terms of U.S. cartels, in terms of monopolies, quite high.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you that, I thought it was remarkable how they fought the net metering. They tried to dissolve it. How they successfully fought the ability of, say, an apartment complex to install solar and have it shared among their residents and in effect sell it from neighbor to neighbor. So our power companies have been quite effective at defending their own monopoly and their profit margins. And these utilities net deliver to their shareholders often over many years 20% return on investment every year. So that's a pretty good business model, and one that they're going to fight tooth and nail to defend. And that goes across both parties. The Democratic Party is subject to pressure from these same utilities as well, not just Republican legislators.
Fair enough. Okay. As a reminder, if you're attending on Facebook, please enter your questions into the chat in our live stream. If you're attending by Zoom, also feel free to answer or to put questions into the chat box. If anybody has any last questions or comments, now is the time. So anyone have any closing thoughts or questions?
Well, I like to just mention I'm here in the water pavilion today. Still trying to find the various pavilions. They have a nifty new app where they have a map that will tell you where each pavilion is. But just minutes before settling on the water pavilion, I was trying to find another pavilion. And I swear it took me to an abandoned building. And I'm wandering the halls of this unused Pavilion Expo building, and there is nobody in there. So definitely not, the map is not accurate, and we're going to have to figure out something. If the UN can't even figure out which end is up at their own convention, doesn't bode well for solving a complex issue like the climate crisis.
At the very least, it'll be a little bit humorous as we watch COP28 unfold into tragedy or perhaps even terror at this point.
Well, it's fun.
Okay, well, seeing as there are no other questions, John, any last thoughts, or shall we close off here?
Well, I think Michael and I and Dana arrives tonight. Dana Freling from Democrats Abroad. So tomorrow we'll have an expanded team, and hopefully we'll have a better feel for the locations of the various pavilions and be able to get some experience in their sessions and begin to relate to you what's going on at COP28.
Absolutely. Michael, thank you so much for the presentation. Bibi, thank you so much for the questions in the chat. Really enjoyed them. And John, thank you as always for attending such wonderful presentations. And as a reminder, we'll be holding each of these daily briefings live at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Feel free to, again, reach out to us if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. And in the meantime, we will see you all tomorrow. Take care, everyone.